Karen has done such a magnificent and complete job of introducing the two of us, I won't have to do that now, so I can jump directly to page 3 on my notes. But we are here to pay tribute to this landmark work. It is, by the way, debuting as number 6 on the Times bestseller list, which is quite a debut for a book, and it's certainly worth every minute of it. I'm especially taken, Ronen, by the title of the book. The subtitle kind of gives it away, The Secret History of Israel's Targeted Assassinations, but I'm particularly taken by the title of the book, Rise and Kill First, which, as you suggest at the beginning, comes directly from the Babylonian Talmud. If someone comes to kill you, rise up and kill him first. That dates back, as my putting on my hat as an historian, back at least 15 centuries, yet you seem to suggest it's still equally relevant today. So I'd like to start with what to me is one of the central premises of your amazing book, namely that the security, in fact, the very existence of the Jewish state is founded on this principle that assassinations of key individuals are vital to its survival. Do you still have that sense after all of your interviews and all of your understanding that this is indeed a core reason for the existence of the Jewish state today?
Thank you, David. First, I would like to thank the Center and Karen Greenberg for inviting me. It's a great honor. The last week since the book was launched, we're happy, and I was positively surprised by the reception the book had with the American media, especially when the book doesn't have even one mentioning of President Trump. So
which may explain its popularity.
So here's
actually
the main secret: the American media can deal with something that is not about Trump. And I was very, very happy to discover that. And thank you for inviting me, and thank you for everybody for being here. The reason why we decided to call, we had all sorts of names. We had License to Kill, Licenses to Kill, but we thought maybe that's too James Bondy, and we were trying to keep away from what we see in movies. The real world of the real Israeli intelligence is not what you saw in James Bond, or for that sake, in Spielberg, Munich. The real world is very, very different. We try to do something different, and the reason why we use that phrase of the Talmud, whoever comes to kill you, rise up and kill him first, is because it was used again and again and again by many, many, many of the 1,000 interviewees which I met in order to write the book. They have quoted the Babylonian Talmud not in order to justify themselves, not as a sort of an alibi. They quoted the Talmud because this was their mindset. It's not just that their mindset, it's the mindset of the people of Israel.
So they felt they needed to justify themselves in some
No, they
fashion.
didn't. It's a mindset. It's not in Israel. It's sometimes hard to explain it. I know that the use of targeted killing in many countries would be seen as impolitically correct, to say the least. I have lectured in Germany just a week ago, and the book was launched there. This is a problematic issue. And I think it's encapsulated in one of the blurbs given by former Mossad chief Tamir Pardo, who said, this is the question that we have been dealing every day in our job. What sort of means does democracy allow itself to practice and use in order to defend its citizens, while knowing that these means violate other values, like the right of living, like the right of privacy when we're talking about other collection of intelligence in great masses. And so I think it's extremely relevant. I think that people in Israel, because of the past, because of the Holocaust, because of the experience of the Jewish people, but not just because of what happened then. Once your prime nemesis in each decade of the last 70 years, Israel is going to celebrate 70 in the coming May. Once your prime enemy declares that its main goal is to destroy you and bring a second annihilation, then you rise and kill first. When President Nasser of Egypt, saying he has missiles that are going to destroy every point south of Beirut, and the voice of thunder from Cairo, the Egyptian radio, is saying we are going to destroy Al-Hay'a as-Sahyuniyya, which means the Zionist entity. They didn't say Israel. You had Yasser Arafat, who in the Palestinian Covenant declared that every Jew that came to Israel after 1917, which was basically all of them and their descendants, needs to be expelled or killed. Saddam Hussein threatened to burn half of Israel. President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad declared that Israel should be wiped out of the map. So once that is your main concern, and having in the back of your mind what happened in the Second World War, then you will spare no means. And you will also take very, very little attribution to international law when defending your people.
So let me ask you this. In a number of countries, assassination is used. In fact, it's banned in the United States, actually banned by an executive order. Since we're in the law school, I can tell you it's Executive Order 12333, which bans the use of
President Ford
assassinations.
Was the first to sign it.
Right, exactly. But in some places, in France, for instance, it's used not regularly, but it's used from time to time. And in fact, my last book, which I wrote, as you know, with the head of the French CIA, he told me the system that they use there. He would, when he needed to do this horrific act, the president of France insisted that he sign off on it personally. But he didn't want to be known to sign off on it. So Marange, the head of the CIA, the French CIA, the STEC, DGSE, would go to the Élysée Palace, and he would present the problem and the target, and then he would stop. And he would wait for 1 minute. And if the president said, "Oh, no, you can't do that," he wouldn't do it. But if he said nothing, he would simply get up and leave, knowing that he had the tacit approval of the president. How does that work in Israel now?
It has been working the same since Israel was established. The only authority having the power to okay a kill is Israeli Prime Minister. Sometimes that Prime Minister will assemble a small committee, usually, almost always, the Minister of Defense, sometimes the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Golda Meir wanted to have also someone religious, one of the religious ministers, so there's sort of some authority from God. She wanted to have that as part of the decision-making process. They all understood, and still understanding, the gravity of that, to issue a death verdict in a country that does not have death penalty in its criminal code, except for Nazis, and doing that without court, without evidence, without due process, without due diligence, without a prosecutor, without the defense, there's nothing there. The only thing you have in such forums is the chief of the organization. You mentioned the head of the DGSA, the chief of the Mossad, the chief of the Shin Bet, the Israeli Domestic Secret Service, coming to the Prime Minister to convince him. This is usually happening in his private house, the house of the Prime Minister in Balfour Street in Jerusalem, because it's so secret. Now, of course, the chief of the organization, whoever he is updated with the details, but he's not updated with the small the tiny maneuvers of the coming action. So he's bringing with him the intelligence officers and the operatives. Now, these are very young people. We are talking about people, most of them under the age of 30. Some of them under the age of 35. This is how the Israeli system works. They bring the PDF and the Adobe Acrobat presentation, and they are trying to convince the Prime Minister. Just imagine the drama in that forum. And also, throughout time, some of these people, the young officers, who were there to convince the Prime Minister to issue an assassination of someone because he's bad enough and he's planning to kill Jews tomorrow. Some of these people crossed that room during time and became the Prime Minister. Ehud Barak, Benjamin Netanyahu, Moshe Ya'alon, the Israeli former Minister of Defense. Moshe Ya'alon was the person who pulled the trigger himself on the head of Abu Jihad, Khalil al-Wazir, Yasser Arafat deputy in Tunis in 1988. Now, you come to think, or you come to wonder, what does the profound involvement, not in knowing, not in sending people, but the actual having the enemy head on your hindsight and pulling the trigger, what does it do to your mindset when you become a prime minister and you need to, I would say, use some other means, diplomacy, for example?
And some of them have in fact done that. Begin, for instance, was named a terrorist by the British occupying authorities before the independence. But that's very interesting, because what I'm wondering about is if such actions were more tightly restricted, the leadership of Israel less rigid in its demands, might it not be possible to move more directly towards political or diplomatic solutions to problems rather than simply say, this is a good tactical solution, we can take it, and this will solve the problem? Does it remove from the political and diplomatic authorities, even the military authorities, the felt necessity of trying to find another means of solving the problem diplomatically or politically? Are you concerned about that?
Very much. Maybe we're moving a bit forward to some of the bottom lines of the book, but arguably Israeli intelligence is indeed the best intelligence community in the world. No offense to the American or the French. You know, Tim Weiner wrote a book, Pulitzer winner, Legacy of Ashes, about the CIA. And he describes a history of failures. My book does not describe a history of failure. On the contrary, Israeli intelligence, sooner or later, was able to come with solution to most, if not all, the tactical problems that the Israeli leaders presented to it. There were botched operations, we can discuss them later, but at the end of the day, this is a story about success. But in that success are also the grains and the problem. Because Israeli leaders came to the conclusion that at the tip of their fingers, they have this powerful tool where they can order to take out a building, a computer, or a human being way beyond enemy line. And they thought it's not just enough to use that to save, people tomorrow from the next suicide bomber, or to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb by killing one of their scientists, or more than one. But they thought this is a powerful tool that can be used to stop history, to hold it by its tail. And therefore, the story in the book is a story of unbelievable series of tactical successes of the Israeli intelligence community, but also of a disastrous strategic political failure from these politicians who thought it's enough to have these tools and not turning to statesmanship, political discourse, diplomacy, and compromise.
Well, that's it. When Netanyahu, for instance, decided to leave the efforts to control the Iranian march toward a nuclear bomb in the hands of the Mossad and the assassinations and the Stuxnet ideas and so on, he never really came to understand the value of delaying Iran's progress by at least a decade with the Iran nuclear agreement. If he did not have those other means available, if there were not those other a series of successes, might he have considered, therefore, the nuclear deal somewhat more appealing?
Well, I think that the fierce Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu objection to the nuclear deal had some other considerations. And I believe that he thought that he would be able to play a vital role inside American politics and fight President Obama to the extent that he would delay or prevent this deal from coming. But let us look at the same thing from the Iranian point of view. The Iranian would never agree to come to the negotiation table to make these concessions if it wasn't for the series of actions that were taken against them by the West, led by the United States and Israel. I would say more. If the Iranians would have come to the negotiation 2 years later, they were in a much worse shape. The fact that it was too early. The United States started to negotiate with Iran too early in late 2012 in Muscat, and they did that because Netanyahu was threatening the United States that he is going to strike. If you look at the real analysis of things and the facts and the secrets behind the scenes, you will see that Netanyahu pushed the U.S. when threatening to strike Iran. He pushed the U.S. too much, and Obama thought it would be the only way to prevent Israel from striking to start political discourse with Iran.
So before I open this up to the group, I'd like to ask one final question. It's basically a moral question. I'd love to know how you feel about the validity of assassination as either a tactical or strategic tool, and also whether you think that effectively this is self-defense, and how will this play out in the future historically? Will these people be vindicated? will there arise a new generation, young people like yourselves, who do believe that there is another way forward? Or will the successes of the past in some fashion affect the actions of the future?
Well, on question of effectiveness, and I know that this could not be accepted and seen as right by some of the audience, but on question of effectiveness, the Israeli experience, by far the most vast of all the countries on the face of the earth, were using these extrajudicial targeted killing. Targeted killing and assassinations, when they are part of an overall policy, when they are done systematically, when they are not done out of some sort of emotional zeal in order to show them that we are doing something, or revenge, Israeli experience has proven that they can be very effective. Just three examples. The assassinations, the targeted killing campaign that Israel conducted after the killing of the Israeli athletes in Munich in 1972. This is not what you saw in the movies. What you saw in the movies is as if they went to a revenge and killing the people who were behind the killing of the athletes. This is not true. Israel started to kill people, PLO operatives in Europe, and that led Arafat and his deputy Khalil al-Wazir to rethink and close down their operation in Europe for many, many years, because they realized that if they continue, they carry a significant price tag. Their people are being killed and their prestige is being tarnished. They stopped. Second example, the wave of suicide terrorism that flooded Israel since 2001 until 2004, what was later called the Second Intifada. People were getting killed every day in the streets of Israel, shopping malls, buses, kindergartens. The only thing that stopped these people from exploding was that Israel started to kill the Palestinian leaders and the regional commanders, the bomb makers, the drivers, the recruiters, the indoctrinators. Once these people, not the actual perpetrators, because Hamas boasted that they are more volunteers than suicide belts. But when they started to kill the people above them in the command chain, these people started to think twice. They had no problem with sending others to the death, but once the price tag was attached to their own life, well, they had another thought. And third example, on the effectiveness, I asked Michael Hayden, former chief of the NSA and the CIA, I said, General Hayden, please name one tool of everything that Israel and the United States wanted or tried to use against the Iranian nuclear armament advancement. Dual-use equipment prevention, Stuxnet viruses, political pressure, etc. Name one that was the most significant. And he did not hesitate. And he said, Ronen, the one thing that delayed the Iranian from significantly from having a bomb is the fact that someone, I don't know who he said, it's illegal according to American law, that someone was starting to kill their scientists. And I smiled. He said, Ronen, don't smile. The Israelis have never told us anything about that. I don't know. But he recalled that incident, the first National Security Council meeting with President Obama. When the president asked the chief of the CIA, Michael Hayden, he said, General Hayden, do you know how much enriched uranium is there in Natanz, one of the enrichment facilities in Iran? To which Michael Hayden answered, Mr. President, actually I do know the answer to this question, but let me tell you, it doesn't matter. There is no one neutron that would end up in a nuclear bomb from Natanz. What they are building in Natanz is knowledge. There's one way to destroy knowledge. To the second question, the fact that Israel and the United States has employed targeted killing extensively. You said that it's forbidden, according to American law, to use assassination, but it's permitted to use targeted killings. You know, that euphemism that the legal counsel for the CIA has used in order to enable the agency to use the to use the predator in order to kill people, drones, that has made the CIA extensively using targeted killing. The fact that Israel and the United States used that in numerous times since 2000 and 2001 has also led to a dramatic change in international law. Even human rights organizations, Human Watch and Amnesty, do consider today a legal act when you kill a terrorist in his bed at night, not just when he's in the battlefield wearing his uniforms. Of course, he doesn't have uniforms, wearing uniforms, and allow himself to be part of that act. That has changed the international law. The problem is, of course, the collateral damage. This is the main issue when coming to examine targeted killing on legality, on morality. And I think that in time, I hope, people here in the United States, examining American history, and people in my country, in Israel, would be courageous enough to look at themselves in the mirror and ask, did we did enough to prevent collateral damage? And I'm not sure that the answer to that question would be positive.
Well, on that cheerful note, why don't we open it up for questions? I would ask you, if you can, to identify yourself. I believe we have some microphones. Wait for the microphone to come to you. And please try to make it a question and rather than a declaration. Yes, I should note, by the way, that this is being taped for broadcast, so everything is on the record. Yes, right behind you there.
David Schachter, John Jay College. Ronen, please share with us why you think so many former Israeli officials cooperated so much with you in preparation for your book.
Why so many Israeli officials cooperated with Ronen for his book?
I smiled. Which is a short answer and not entirely false. This is part of it. But I think, look, when meeting all these people, I warned myself that intelligence officers, as well as politicians, by far the fine masters of manipulation, disinformation, misinformation, and that they might be trying to use me to portray history in the way that they think is right. I was trying to bypass or put aside these attempts by interviewing so many people. 1,000 interviewees, some of them I saw a few times. Just Meir Dagan, the former Mossad chief. I have transcripts from Dagan of 400 pages of recordings. This is one of 1,000, so this is by itself a book. So the reason why they talk, each one has his own reason. But at the end of the day, and that goes back to rise up and kill first, that phrase that was repeatedly used by many of the interviews, I think that many of them really wanted the people of Israel, the people of the world, after being so many years in the shadow, to know what they did to defend Israel. These people are not murderers. These people did what they thought need to be done, to be the guards on the wall and keep Israeli citizens safe.
Confession and justification.
Again, I don't think that they confessed or justified themselves, because I don't think that they, from their point of view, they have nothing to justify. They want to, I don't want to say boast, but they wanted people of Israel to know what they have done. You know, I remember one interview with the guy who is now 93. His name is Nathan. And he was the demolition expert for one of the military intelligence unit back in the 50s. And he was making a lot of small letter bombs or bombs concealed in watches and in oranges and in many, many other things. And he said, Ronen, do you know what is the main characteristic a person like me need? I said, yes, of course, you love explosives. You love explosives more than you love your wife. It's clear. Said, yes, of course, that's a given. But another thing, what do you think I need more than anything? I said, what? He said, people like me need to know how to forgive. I said, forgive? What's the relevance of that? Forgive who? Forgive terrorists? He said, yes. It's a professional thing. We need to know how to forgive. He said, even mega terrorists like Osama bin Laden? He said, no, Osama bin Laden is someone only God has the authority to forgive. My job, Nathan's job, was to arrange the meeting. And in my office, in my laboratory, I opened the office of arranging meetings with God. And again, he saw that as a necessity. Of course, this was using some black humor, but he saw that as a necessity, something that need to be done to make sure Israeli citizens are safe.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for the fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
Joseph Rosen, Stony Brook University. I'm curious, Ronen, if you could talk about any, interesting stories in dealing with censors in Israel. I imagine that there must have been some issues, and I guess some of the blurbs, like people wished you very badly and so on. So, can you talk at all about the issue of censorship in Israel and how you dealt with that? I'm sure when I read the book,
I can tell you from my own personal experience as a correspondent, I once was in Israel for CBS. We had shot some pictures of some tanks in maneuvers up near the Lebanese border. And we were about 3 miles away. You could barely see that it was a tank. And an Israeli military censor said, you can't send those pictures out. You can see the numbers on the sides of the tank indicating which unit it's from. I said, you can't even see that it's a tank. Anyway.
Yeah, sometimes these people who are actually security officers tend to be very tough, very rigid, very hard to deal with. The question, I think, is not whether to publish or not publish something that harms Israeli security and spill its secret. I think no one would like to do that. Maybe the Iranians would like, but it's not a common interest by us or by Random House or by anyone else. The question is, how do you define state security? In 1965, maybe I said something about censorship. According to Israeli press, has to be going through censorship prior to print. According to an old British law that the Brits legislate to their colonies and Israel absorbed when it was established in 1948. So the Israeli journalists, the Israeli press, the Israeli media are giving to censorship, to prior scrutiny, everything that we publish on national security, military intelligence, oil, and the Middle East. So in 1965, one of the famous arts columnists, Yoel Marcus, wrote something in the line that the chief of staff is not very smart. Censorship took it out. They banned that from being published. They said this is a military secret. And that if the enemy would know that the chief of staff is not very smart, then he might take an action. So, and they were serious. We treat this as a joke now, but they were deadly serious at that time. War crimes, would they be seen as state secret? Now, the state would see them as a secret, but I don't think that they are a secret. And et cetera, et cetera. So we have, being an Israeli correspondent, I have a weekly, sometimes daily negotiation and argument with the Israeli censorship. They have added many deletions, and we have been struggling with them when coming to publish the book. But let me tell you this, at the end of the day, I think that Rise and Kill First is able to supply its reader a complete, or at least close to complete picture of the narrative, the world, and the broader lesson that I was trying to bring.
So let me ask you one further question then. What did you leave out of the book that the censors would not let you publish? In generic terms, if not specific.
Look, and I was not intending to publish anything that could jeopardize modus operandi, or name of sources, or names of relatives of sources.
Sources and methods.
Sources and methods, modus operandi are out. And there are some questions that, I even stated that very clearly. I don't know what happened to Yasser Arafat, what led to his demise in 2004. And even if I knew, I could only say that I don't know. This is, always leaving something for the next book.
We'll look for it eagerly. Yes, right back there.
Thank you for the very fascinating discussion. This is Rome Carey from The Nation magazine. I wonder if you could tell us how the pace and structure of targeted assassination has changed over the decades. You said earlier that it's something that's very deeply inbred in the sort of guess what, conceptia is how they would say it about the state. So it's been there since 48, but I'm thinking in particular since the Second Intifada, when so many of the perceived enemies of Israel are within the boundaries of what is, if not de facto, de facto what is closer to home, and the increasing pace of assassinations in the Second Intifada. Is there a difference in the way this is conceived, carried out, and what do you think the effect has been on Israeli society of assassinations over the years? Is the consciousness of it, the perceived necessity of it, has that risen, has it fallen, has it been challenged more in the last 10 to 15 years than, say, 30 years ago when the PLO was the primary enemy?
Borrowing from Marshall McLuhan, I would say that technology is the message. In the sense that technology has brought such an advancement to the war machine of assassination that it had made it by far on a different caliber. What the Mossad took years to plan and execute somewhere in Europe or in the Arab world, the war room that was established in North Tel Aviv, from which targeted killing operations started to be executed since 2001, could do 4 a day, 4 operations a day. And that thanks to technology, to armament that could be launched from distant location, through drones and channels of commanded communication. And so in that sense, that has changed very, very much. The use of assassination, the use of targeted killing as a conception, as you rightly put it, was there from the beginning. And maybe I should say a word of why. Because David Ben-Gurion, the most important Jew in the last 1,000 years at least, he, from day one, he understood that Israel would not be able to sustain and survive all-out wars, if at all. Israel cannot have its recruit and draft and reservist stationed on its borders for more than a week or so. The other possibility was to try to prolong the times between a war and the next war, or delay it as much as possible, and have strong intelligence community that would supply an alert for a preemptive attack, sufficient intelligence on the enemy, and try to have the ability to launch pinpoint operation way beyond enemy lines. That was why targeted killing was so central from day one. It was central against the PLO in the 70s, according to the abilities of Mossad at that time. And it became crucial, dramatically, profoundly crucial, against the suicide bombers. I would say the whole country, the whole intelligence service, and the armed forces were recruited only to one specific goal. Ariel Sharon, as Prime Minister of Israel, have said, Jews are being killed now. Everything else should be put aside, and everyone should be recruited to help the Shin Bet, the Israeli Domestic Secret Service, trace down and kill the perpetrators. Now, these are Israelis, these are Jews. To have military intelligence put under the command of Shin Bet, it's an ego thing, it's not an easy thing. But they all obeyed under the necessity of war, and it worked.
Peter Weiss, Center for Constitutional Rights. That phrase that you found.
Could you lift up the microphone? No, we can't really hear you.
Can you hear me? Yes. That phrase that everybody gave you from the Talmud has 2 parts to it. The second part is easy to understand. If somebody comes to kill you, kill first. But what about the first part? That must have been very different in the days of the Talmud from the way it is today. How do you know that so-and-so is coming to kill? And in your thousands of interviews, did you arrive at a definition of the conditions that people gave themselves in order to kill somebody who they thought was coming to kill them?
That's a very good question. I think there are some cases that are not disputable. If someone is leading the Hamas military Azadin al-Qassam brigade, and they are behind the suicide bombers, and he's planning himself, being deeply in the planning of more suicide bombers, then he is there to kill you. It's becoming tricky when we are talking about people that are not directly involved in terrorism. Many of the people that Mossad killed after the Munich massacre of the athletes were not directly connected to the Munich attack, but not directly connected to terrorism at all. They were PLO operatives in Europe or PLO officials in Europe. But if quoting one of the Mossad operatives who was after them, he said that the only involvement they had in Munich is maybe that the airplane that took the perpetrators was going over their heads. That person even said, some of the Palestinians that we killed in these years, we didn't know why we killed them, and they, until today, don't know why they were killed. But other people from the Mossad say, it's enough for someone to have any duty in a terrorist organization, and it doesn't matter whether he's a clerk, a bureaucrat, a military leader, or a politician, but as much as he's part of an organization like the PLO in the 70s or Hamas today that is aimed to killing Israelis, that is enough to make that person a legitimate target. Now, everyone would have his own legal and moral judgment of that, but that is the reasoning. It's called not just hitting ticking bomb, but hitting a ticking infrastructure.
Yes, back there.
I haven't read I'm Bob Dreyfus. I'm a journalist here in New York. I haven't read your whole book, so maybe you answer some of this in the book, but I'm going to ask. I have been to Iran a couple of times.
It's a big book. It's not, just was published, so it's okay not to read all of it at once.
I'll get through all of it, I'm sure. So I've been to Iran a couple of times, and I've talked to a lot of Iranian officials and also people involved in the U.S.-Iran talks and so forth. And I think they would challenge what you said about Israel's effect on the negotiations. In fact, I think it was the opposite. And I guess I want to ask you what evidence you have that the killing of Iranian scientists, who, by the way, were not coming to kill you. They weren't rising up to kill you. They were just low-level scientists. Or the threats to go to war against Iran. People I've talked to, both in the United States and in Iran, said that was counterproductive, that it helped the hardliners in Iran, the people who might want to keep the nuclear program, who might argue we need a nuclear bomb because we're going to be attacked and so forth. The Obama people were horrified by this. They found it to be an obstruction because it made it harder for the moderates in Iran to agree to the deal. So I guess I want to know what evidence you have for the contrary argument.
Certainly screwed up their recruiting efforts, didn't it?
Their recruiting
efforts of the Iranians to find scientists who would come and work on those.
Well, look, I do agree that there's a moral issue with killing scientists who were employees of a sovereign government and didn't kill anyone, or for that sake were directly involved in terrorism, or involved in terrorism at all. So there's a moral issue here that can't be addressed. But generally, I just quoted Michael Hayden. He is not an Israeli, and he has a long list of evidence why not just killing the scientists, but many of the steps that were taken both by Israel and the United States, including Stuxnet, Olympic Games, the malwares, political pressure, the prevention of export of dual-use equipment to Iran, all of that together was very, very successful. The proof is, by the way, that Iran, for 15 years, 12 years, did not agree, 13 years, did not agree to have that kind of agreement that was proposed to it much earlier, and agreed only after their economy was on the brink of collapse because of these sanctions. More than that, there is no dispute. And of course, I'm sure that the Iranian officials or people who are influenced by these officials that you have met in Iran would say that this was counterproductive. This is what you expect them to say. But there is no dispute between all of intelligence agencies that I have met, including in closed doors, the Russian and the Chinese, on the basic facts that Iran, since 1998 at least, if not earlier than that, was trying to build an atomic bomb. Now, were they planning to drop this bomb in Israel? I don't think so. They wanted to have a bomb in order to be a regional power. But there is no dispute that they were trying to do that, concealing the military path, the military part of their project, which is led by one of the scientists that the Iranians believe is the Mossad prime target, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who is not a low-level official. He's one of the high rank of the Iranian government. And they were lying to the IAEA, they were lying to the world, they were feeding the world with false information about what they were trying, and they were very, very close in making the breakthrough towards a bomb. Now, can Israel, and again, I don't think that they were just about to pull the trigger if they had the red button, but can Israel allow itself to let a country that publicly calls for its destruction to have the means to deliver such annihilation? In that sense, and I think maybe that's the only point, I agree with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Noah. I'm a graduate student at NYU. So you were talking about the success of the targeted killing, but those success stories are essentially tactical success stories. In the grander scheme of things, we still have the nuclear threat is still on the doorstep. We still have terrorism in Israel. Is that in the conversation when they talk about the targeted killing, that maybe it's time to take a further step, or maybe they're not as successful in the long term as we think they are?
Well, it depends whose discourse you are inquiring about. Surprisingly, that is at the heart of the discourse among intelligence and defense officials. You will find these people, by far, more liberal, open-minded, and to the left of the political scale, according to the Israeli terminology. In Israel, the definition of who is left and right is only on his views on liberalism and the two-state solution and how to reconcile with the Arabs. In fact, the Israeli armed forces and intelligence services have been by far looking after Israeli democracy more than its leaders. And I think that there's something very unhealthy in a country where the mature grown-up is the intelligence services and the generals of the army. I think that it's usually the other way around. Usually the politicians have to restrain the generals who are eager to go for action and trigger happy. In Israel, it's the other way around. In Israel, the generals are trying to restrain the government.
The knife between the teeth, as you put it.
Yeah, yes. And I don't want to spoil the book, but to do a spoiler, but if you read the book, you will see that some of the main characters, like Ariel Sharon or Meir Dagan, for years believed that force can solve everything. Later, in more advanced stages of their life, close to their death, unfortunately, they came to the opposite conclusion. They came to the conclusion that only reconciliation, only political discourse can be that stage after using force, after rise and kill first. And that the rise and kill first is good to solve the immediate threat, but it needs to be addressed by political discourse
I'd
after
like
it.
to go one step further and ask you whether you think there's some common thread through all of these extraordinary tales you're telling here. Is there some common thread that suggests when an operation might fail and when it might succeed?
Well, you are asking from an intelligence or operational point of view.
Well, in any fashion. I mean, there are various forms of success, right?
Right. Look, there were many, many cases where the operation was successful, but it led to a catastrophic results. The attempts to kill leaders, most of them have changed history, but not to it did not take the same course as the planners thought. In February 1992, the first assassination that involved drones in history, Israel killed the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hussein Abbas Musawi. Now, they thought he's the leader of a terrorist organization. They have the opportunity to kill him. Why don't do it? They killed him, only to get, instead of him, getting Hassan Nasrallah, who's by far more talented, capable, radical, who changed the priority of Hezbollah, and instead of focusing on internal Lebanese politics, he focused on Israel. And they got 40 days afterward, the bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, which basically rewrite the rules of the game between Israel and Hezbollah, when Hezbollah said, if you are hurting us in Lebanon, we will take out a Jewish target, and you cannot defend all Jewish targets worldwide all the time. We will take it out in a remote place of the world. And Israel, for many, many years, because of taking the embassy and then the Amia building in Buenos Aires, Israel refrained from killing Hezbollah leaders for many, many years. And so killing leaders, I think Israel have tried to be very, very restrained in that. And the general rule about success or not is a very, very careful planning and collection of intelligence and paying tribute even to forces that you think are very, very weak. You remember the incident in Dubai in 2010. You know, Mossad operatives, 27 of them, came into Dubai to kill a Hamas operative. They killed him. By the way, they killed him twice. Because a few months earlier, they were following him to Dubai. They poisoned one of the food around him, but they were not there to see him die. He took that food, and apparently poison is not an exact science. So he got ill. He went back to Damascus. He hospitalized himself in a military hospital in Damascus. He was diagnosed with mono and recovered. Didn't know how close he was to death. Next time, the Mossad assassins wanted to make sure, so they hold him, they suffocate him, and they use that special material injected into his blood. They stripped him off, they put him in a pajama, and they put him into bed. They went home, they got out of Dubai, and they thought everything is wonderful. They didn't know that just a few weeks afterwards, the whole world is going to be watching. And so they just neglected the fact that all Dubai has thousands of CCTV cameras that everybody could watch, and the police of Dubai could just unreveal what they were doing.
Okay, in the back, very back.
Hi, I'm Sam Wiener. I'm a second-year law student here at Fordham. My question is, you referenced the movie Munich earlier, and between Munich and the popular show Fauda, I'm curious about your thoughts on the representation in popular culture of Israel's assassination machine, and whether that popularity, I guess is the best word for it, at least in the media and its portrayal, does more good, more bad, or is neutral with regard to public perception and understanding of what Israel is attempting to do.
And I think Fauda does really raise many of the moral questions that you raise in your book, which is quite extraordinary.
And the unit upon which Fauda's story is based, it's called Cherry, Duvdevan, features the real stories of that unit, featuring some of the chapters of the book, one of them of how they disguised themselves not as Arabs but as an ABC team. And they kidnapped one of the most wanted Arab terrorists, and when his family called the day after to ABC office in Jerusalem to say, "Where's our son?" they said, "We don't know, we weren't there." And that caused a political problem for the state of Israel when the chair of ABC called the Prime Minister Shamir. Look, I think that much of what we see in the movies is, of course, fictionalized, and is very, very different, because what James Bond does by himself is divided into many, many, many expertise done by many, many dozens to hundreds of people in reality. But as advanced as we get in time, I think that and as David indicated, I think that the movies and the TV series are getting more advanced to incorporate much of the dilemmas that the operatives are taking into account. And of course, it's very much exaggerated and very much fictionalized, but I think we are slightly more reflective and having a better idea of what this is all about.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Michael Varelli, no affiliation. Thank you for giving this talk. You mentioned you had spoken to several, people, ex-officers.
Speak up just a little bit. We have a microphone. We have the cameras also.
Sure. You mentioned you talked to several people who were proud of the work they had done for their country and their involvements in these assassinations. If one of those men or women, the next time they went and started their car, was blown to smithereens by a bomb planted by an Iranian intelligence officer, what do you think the reaction in Israel would be? All's fair in love and war?
If I understand correct the question, before you take the microphone away, you are asking what would happen if another intelligence agency would react and try to start assassinating Israeli officials as a revenge for what Israel has done? That's the question?
Correct.
Okay. Well, it happened. In the 70s, the PLO reacted fiercely to the fact that Israel was trying to kill its operative. They had redoubled some of the double agents that the Mossad was operating. They exposed some of the Mossad double agents and convinced them to turn again and kill the case officer from Mossad who was running them. And so Mossad was under attack as well. But Israel was by far more advanced, more organized, and more strict. And so the attempts to revenge were not very, very successful and were addressed by severe force. The Iranians have tried to revenge both the assassination of the nuclear scientist and more, the assassination of Imad Murnia by the US and Israel in Damascus in 2008. Israel intelligence has counted so far 27 attempts to revenge Murnia's life. And except for one in Bulgaria, when they exploded a bus of Israeli tourists, they failed in all of them. One Israeli operative told me the main reason why there was not even one successful, effective attempt to revenge for Murnia's life is the fact that Imad Murnia is no longer here to revenge his death. Because he was a genius. He was very, very capable. But it's not just that. Israel, what made the last 15 years more successful from the point of view of Israel than previous times against Iran and Hezbollah, Hamas, and the other jihadist movements is that it's not just the Israeli ability to execute, but also prepare for the countermeasures that would be taken again by the other side in the day after. Israel was prepared, and their intelligence penetration into the rank of Iran and Hezbollah is superb.
Well, on that note, I think we owe an enormous debt of gratitude to Ronen Bergman for an extraordinary and riveting thing. I would especially urge all of you to buy the book. There are still a few left here. He can sign them, presumably.
Thank you.
And I hope that this will help to raise his ranking to number 1 or at least 2 or 3 on the next New York Times bestseller list.
Thank you. Randall is going to send you a check, David.
So in closing, a couple of things. We don't do a lot of sessions at the Center on National Security on killing. However, we have done many on targeted killings and on some on warfare, on foreign policy, on diplomacy. And so it is my wish, and I hope you join me in this wish, that soon, like tomorrow, but soon, we'll be talking about a book that is about peace, diplomacy, and the need for no warfare. Thank our speakers. Please rise.
Inshallah.